For those of you who just joined us, and if you didn't hear before, my name is Chris Condich. I'm the Executive General Manager here at Citation Certification. Welcome to today's webinar would be only the one. Place the winning bid, how to win in 2026. Before we dive into the presentation, though, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. If you have a question during the webinar, please enter it in the Q&A feature. It's the one with the question mark and not the chat function at the bottom of your screen. At the end of today's presentation, we'll come back to these questions and aim to answer as many as possible. If not, we will do so after the webinar. Guys, there's no need to wait until the end. You can type your questions throughout the webinar. And yes, today's webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you post today's session. Good attendance today. I'm guessing many of you are here because you're looking to grow your business through bids and tenders. That makes sense because that's our topic today. And you want to know exactly what it takes to win. By the time we finish the session, you should walk away with some strategies and insights you can apply to your next tender bid. Today's webinar will be hosted by James Smith, founder and managing consultant at Bid Helpdesk. James has spent many years helping businesses across Australia win more contracts through bids and tenders. He's worked with everyone, and I mean everyone, from small business through to large enterprises, and he literally wrote the book on it. We might even have a virtual signing of James's book, Managing Bids, Tenders and Proposals, if he's so inclined. If you're looking to grow your business through tenders, James is the person you want in your corner. I'll also be jumping in through the session to talk about how ISO certification fits into the process and how it can give your business a genuine competitive edge. We're delighted to have James with us today. Welcome, James.
Thank you, Chris.
All righty. If you haven't attended one of Citation Group's webinars before, here's a little bit of information about who we are. So for over 30 years, we've been working to help Australian and New Zealand businesses by providing workplace compliance solutions that create better workplaces. So from HR solutions and safety management to ISO certification, law and migration, Citation Group is here to support you with all these aspects. If you'd like to learn more about us, we're pleased to talk to you after today's webinar so we can work together on a solution for you. Today's topic is coming through from Citation Certification. We, as part of the group, have the same 30 years plus of experience and helped thousands of successful organisations through the audit and certification process. We've got some common standards for display up on the screen as we speak as well. And you'll hear from James today, ISO certification isn't just about ticking a compliance box, and I will reiterate that point throughout the entire session. It can be one of the most important tools in your tender toolkit. It helps to signal your business has the processes, governance and credibility to deliver. And as always, if you'd like to learn more about certification and the benefit for your business, happy to speak to you post today's webinar. All right, well, that's all from me. I'm glad, and you all breathe a lovely sigh of relief. You won't be hearing from me until a little later on in the session. I'd love, and it's my absolute pleasure to hand over to James to kick things off. I hope you join the webinar and look forward to your questions, queries and concerns at the end of the session. James, take it away.
Thank you, Chris, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to come and join this presentation webinar from Citation Group. And it's my pleasure to talk about bids and tenders. In fact, it's always my pleasure to talk about bids and tenders. I've found this a fascinating field. I've been working in for 20 years, and I've brought this all together now in a consultancy called Bid Helpdesk that I launched 4 years ago to bring together my experience and that of some of my colleagues and helping all businesses across Australia grow their business, win more contracts, win more secure business by responding to bids and tenders in the right way and hopefully winning. So Bid Helpdesk, we have a website. Our domain name is very simply bidhelpdesk.com. And we are a fast response service for businesses who need to respond to RFPs and RFTs. Very much the case that we have clients contact us, sometimes only days, but usually more like weeks or 6 to 8 weeks or so before a tender needs to be submitted. And we work with them to develop a compelling, compliant and competitive response. There's a lot of resources available on the website. As Chris just kindly mentioned, a few years ago, I did write a textbook, Managing Bids, Tenders and Proposals. I'm pleased to say I did have a US-based publisher for that, and I'm proud of the fact that there is a copy because it was published in America in the US Library of Congress. More recently, I launched a newsletter on LinkedIn called The Bidding Edge, and I was delighted last week to see that we now have exceeded 1,000 subscribers to that. There'll be contact details at the end, and I would urge you, if you're interested in bids and tenders, to subscribe to The Bidding Edge. Can we go to the next slide, please, Robert? So in today's agenda, we're going to be talking already 2 parts to this, 3 parts if we include the Q&A. I'm just going to give a high-level picture of the current situation with bids and tenders to help people get orientated if they've never dipped their toe into these waters. And then we'll look at some strategies for winning. Now, obviously, there's a lot to be said around managing and developing a successful bid or tender response. And I do actually have a classroom-based training course, which is 2 days. So I'm sure you can appreciate that on a Thursday lunchtime, we're really only going to scratch the surface. But my intention here is to provide you with some good pointers to give you a feeling about whether you really should be more actively pursuing bids or tenders or not. Next slide, thanks, Robert. So how to win bids and tenders in 2026. In this short presentation, I'm going to go through a number of factors which I found to be reliable guides to whether you will respond. I've included some research on current status of bids and tenders, and I'm going to be drawing together my experience, which I said is over 20 years, starting with Ericsson. My background is I was actually a project manager in IT and telecoms and wanted to move to a more commercially focused role. And I found bids and tenders with the sweet spot, which drew on my skills and experiences. My corporate career concluded during COVID when I was leading the national bids team at Konica Minolta. And then after Konica Minolta, I was then looking for my next adventure, and I conceived of the idea of Bid Helpdesk, as I said, this fast response service, catering for smaller to medium-sized enterprises where you don't have the justification for having in-house bid managers, but once or twice a year, an organisation may need to respond to a bid or tender that's really critical. And so Bid Helpdesk provides corporate capability, expertise and experience as an on-demand service. And I'm pleased to say that in over 4 years, just coming up for 4 years of operation, we've worked on over 80 engagements with 35 different clients across many different sectors of the economy and across Australia as well. It's quite strange to reflect that working virtually has opened up so many more opportunities. Bid Helpdesk has clients in every state and territory capital apart from Hobart, and we have a few regional locations as well. I have a very good client in Toowoomba up in Queensland, and also Darwin and Alice Springs. So we really have covered Australia. So let's get down to business. How to win bids and tenders in 2026. So what we're really talking about here fundamentally is about growing your business. Businesses have to grow. No one can stand still. If you stand still, you'll probably end up going backwards. So there are different ways to grow your business. Internally, you need to focus on many factors. The quality of what you deliver is so important, and being efficient in the delivery of your services, and being available, not just 9 to 5, not just Monday to Friday, but making your services available at any time, if this is appropriate, and in different channels, in different places, expanding your geography, being available when anyone could need your service. Think about how you market yourself and how you make yourself available. And be responsive. Don't just rely on very standardized products. Be able to adapt to customers' different requirements. And above all, focus on the customer experience. Make sure that your customers, your clients, find working with you an absolute delight, and your business will grow. But there are external factors you need to work on as well. Now, channels and partners are a strong way to grow a business, working in a more complex supply chain, working with organizations in related fields, or organizations which simply specialize in being direct channels into particular markets. Marketing itself is a valuable way to grow your business. making sure you've got your positioning right and you're talking to more and more potential clients. Perhaps you could develop an inbound, outbound sales service. You could have teams of people on phones and email campaigns doing that reach out to try and expand awareness of your products and services. Business development tends to be more of a long-term strategic strategy approach, and that really consists or comprises of having expertise with deep industry knowledge and connections, and really exploring longer-term ways of growing your business, forming relationships with larger organizations, both as potential partners or clients, or indeed end users. But bids and tenders, this is something which some organizations choose not to focus on for many different reasons. And part of what I'll be talking through today is showing there are many, many opportunities in bids and tenders for organizations of all different sizes. The first thing about bids and tenders, there are just so many acronyms: RFT, EOI, ITS, RFQ, RFI, RFP, ITT, and even ATM. And what do these terms all mean? Well, I could tell you it's request for tender, expression of interest, request for quotation. And many people say, what's the difference between them? And in fact, there's very, very little difference between them. There's certainly no formal definitions between these different terms. Generally, if you're looking at a bid or a tender, your customer has planned and structured a particular procurement process, and that's what we generically call bids and tenders. One possible difference there is, I've been around long enough to remember when an EOI, or expression of interest, or an RFI, request for information, was purely a research exercise, researching capability and experience and capacity to deliver a solution. Unfortunately, increasingly over time, customers say they are only seeking information, but one of the pieces of information they want is budgetary pricing. Now, as anyone who's ever worked in sales will know, when the customer says, oh, we just need a budgetary price, we'll never hold you to it, there's a big risk that in fact, they will hold you to that price. So budgetary pricing is always a bit of a red flag, but you need to provide the information that the client is looking for. That's one of the messages I cover later on. So really, these days, even EOIs and RFIs are just the same as all the other different tender documents that you may find yourself responding to. I just want to start off by painting the picture of the current bids and tenders scene here in Australia. There's certainly a view that bids and tenders are only for the big boys, or big girls come to that, for much larger organisations. And what I really want to try and persuade you on this call today, if you're in a smaller organisation, maybe only 10 or 20 employees, maybe a few more, there is actually potential to grow your business by gaining capability and experience and winning successfully different bids and tenders. So I just did one sample survey recently because I needed to update some numbers. The federal government releases tenders through a site called AusTender. You may be familiar with that. And I'll be touching on AusTender in a moment. But they're very good and transparent in actually providing statistics on contracts awarded. So with a little bit of skill in navigating a rather slightly hostile user interface, I could download and create a pivot table, which gave me some remarkable numbers I'd like to share with you. So in financial year 25, i.e. one that finished last year on 30th of June, the federal government awarded 34,122 contracts, which is a lot. Perhaps surprisingly, they actually awarded that to 12,727 different companies, which is quite extraordinary. This means that there were many companies winning federal government businesses, not just the major ones that one would be expecting. In fact, many of these were not large dollar value contracts. 15,000 contracts were valued at less than $1 million. And a total of 10,377 companies were awarded contracts in that bracket of under $1 million. And the breakdown of the dollar values of those contracts is quite fascinating, and exactly who won those. So right at the bottom, you can see there's a very small line saying greater than 100. And I think from memory, it was only about 14 organizations received more than 100 different contracts from the federal government. Now, you would expect that to include particularly defense as being a large area of expenditure, that Thales and Lockheed Martin received a number of contracts there, and another number of nationally recognized brands and companies featured in that. But as you will see, by far the dominant size of companies who were awarded bids and tenders under federal government contracts in FY25 had 9 or fewer staff members. Sorry, no, not staff members, I have to backtrack on that. Between 1 company and 9 company received contracts, only 1 contract. So you had just over 8,000 organizations winning a single contract, and between 2 and 9 winning 7,000 contracts, 7,000 companies winning 2 to 9 contracts. So what you see here is that there is a large, long tail of smaller companies winning smaller value contracts under federal government. While it's true that the major dominant players in the major industries do win substantial amount of business through the federal government, there is a very long tail of much smaller companies successfully increasing their revenues by responding through AusTender and winning contracts with the federal government. And I expect there are many people here on this call today who are working for those smaller companies, and who may in fact feel that bids and tenders aren't a place for them. And the message I have for you is that yes, you will be able to uncover opportunities that you can win by responding to bids and tenders through the federal government's AusTender website. A question I get commonly asked, in fact, people often misinterpret the function of Bid Helpdesk. We can provide some assistance in locating and sourcing tenders, but it's not our main line of business. Most of our clients come to us, they've already located a bid or tender, and the most common question I have from people contacting me is, how can we find bids and tenders to respond to? So here are just some logos. This is neither an endorsement or an advertisement. This is just information sharing that we have here. As I mentioned, AusTender is famously the Australian federal government tender, and is probably like the anchor point of all bids and tenders across Australia. Other websites, smaller organisations really should be subscribing to and researching include VendorPanel, which has a lot of opportunities with local government, local councils across Australia. And it must be hundreds, it could even be over 1,000 sort of small local councils around Australia. Just the other month, there was a small council in the back blocks of Queensland, needed to change its IT services provider, and I was able to work with an MSP in securing that business. So VendorPanel is a good source of tenders. They also have non-government tenders on there. Other smaller companies will put tender opportunities on there. In the construction industry, EstimateOne, that's the E1 logo there, the construction industry obviously dominated by the private sector, but they have a very structured market there for publicising opportunities for bids and tenders. If you work in the construction industry, you'll know there's a very large ecosystem supply chain of many different contractors and subcontractors there. If you're in the construction industry, you really do need to be signed up on EstimateOne. Procurement Australia used to be the more dominant source for council tenders, but they are still a valuable source of information to respond to. And there's also Ilion, which many years ago was called Tenderlink. And this is a subscription service, but it does consolidate and aggregate tender opportunities across Australia for the private sector and the public sector. And then, of course, every state government has its own portals and tenders websites, and I've just listed all the ones you expect to see there. Certainly, Buy New South Wales is quite a sophisticated site, providing a lot of opportunities, and Victoria is not too far behind, and all the other states too. You can go there and find businesses with your local state government. So that's where you can go and find your bids and tenders. So what are some top strategies for responding to bids and tenders? Again, I could spend the rest of the afternoon talking through this area, but I've just called out sort of 5 areas that I think you should consider if you're either thinking about getting into bids and tenders, or you've already had some attempt and perhaps you've not been successful. But let's just talk through these points here. Know your ideal opportunity. There are so many bids and tenders available, it can seem a little overwhelming. So if you're a smaller organisation, you should have a very good idea of what is your ideal opportunity. What is the market you serve? What industries are your clients in? What geographic areas do you serve? And exactly what is the business challenge that your solution, your products, your services solve for an organization, be it a government agency, a local council, private sector, developer, constructor, whoever. So really have a strong understanding of your ideal opportunity and be very focused on identifying those opportunities. Something I always say is don't bid for everything. I've actually got another short demonstration, which I won't do today. But actually, if you bid for everything, you're actually increasing the chances of losing everything. Bids and tenders, the best strategy is to focus on your strengths and seek to win those opportunities. Be very discriminating in what you respond to. Some people here may have worked in more sort of established sales organizations where they have sort of proper pipelines and processes, and you might be familiar with the terms go, no go, bid, no bid, or indeed sales qualification. And in larger organizations, that's just a set of criteria that an opportunity must tick the box on before an organization will start spending resources in responding to that particular opportunity. And that filters out the, hey, we could go for this, to the, no, this is an opportunity we can seriously win. And the greatest hallmark of an opportunity you can seriously win is that this is an opportunity that matches your ideal customer profile. It's exactly the business challenge that you solve. Bids and tenders can also be a little bit disruptive inside organizations because who should be responsible? Now, account guys and sales guys and sales gals often take a high sense of ownership of a bid or tender, and that's not a bad thing. It's just that pulling together bid, tender, response, and managing the development process, the skills to do that aren't necessarily the skills that make a good salesperson. So appointing one person to lead and coordinate just brings clarity to the team, and you have one person who is accountable, and that could be called a bid manager. And in fact, that's what Bid Helpdesk does. We provide that coordination and leadership role in terms of executing a process. But the other great saying around bids and tenders is that it is a team sport. Everybody has a role. In fact, in any organization responding to a bid or tender, you need more than just the sales team involved in developing the response. You need to talk to your delivery teams, your logistics teams, your service and support teams to make sure everybody is on the same page and understands what the requirements of the opportunity involve, and that everybody has a way to contribute, views, detailed responses, even costing and pricing information within organizations. Everybody has a role with bid or tender, but success comes when there is one person leading and orchestrating that and supporting the salesperson in winning the opportunity. In addition to knowing your ideal opportunity, make sure you really understand the actual opportunity that the customer has released their bid or tender for. All too often, I find clients who have thought they knew what the opportunity was for, but they hadn't done a real due diligence on the requirements and found themselves not being shortlisted and not getting the opportunity to present because they had missed some key details around the application, the situation, the context, or exactly what objectives the client was to receive. So again, and that's really an onus on the sales team there to have a good relationship or at least insight and understanding and have done their research to make understand why the customer has released this RFP, RFT, or bid or tender. Because another saying I like to have is that customers and clients are really busy people. They've got better things to do than go and issue a bid on a procurement process. Bid or tender that your organisation is serious, has a problem. So in terms of opportunity, is understanding your delivery model. Be very sure you understand how you are going to deliver these requirements, deliver the solution to the customer. That's both in terms of the process, the dependencies that you have, how you will source and resource, but also your costing. So you can put in a profit which you should be able to make a reasonable return. And know your market as well. Now, most people do know their markets. And by that, I mean the customer will also then know what they will expect to receive. They will already have some broad range of numbers that they're expecting the bidding suppliers to respond to. So make sure you price within the customer's budget. Bids and tenders are not an opportunity for high margin responses. Be competitive, because a bid or a tender is the ultimate competitive environment where a number of bidding suppliers are keen to win. Customers don't buy on price alone, they buy on value, but price obviously is a large influencing factor on value. And I'll talk a little bit more about price versus value in a coming slide. And then the final advice I would give around a bid strategy is start early and finish on time. Bids and tenders are notorious for having tight deadlines and people working long hours and weekends and overnight. With Bid Helpdesk, that doesn't happen. We make sure that everything is started work. We initiate all the different work streams as soon as we can, frequently within 24 hours of being engaged. So we make sure that progress is made throughout that very tight time frame, typically only 2 or 3 weeks, and that you don't just finish on time, ideally finish a day early, so you've got a proper time and scope for reviews and approvals. In fact, reviews and approvals are probably one of the most important parts of putting together a bid or tender, making sure everyone in the organisation and those duly authorised, an executive, senior manager, whoever, have reviewed and approved the submission, so that what goes forward to the customer is reliable and represents value. Next slide, Robert. So if there's just one takeaway, apart from the fact that everybody should be involved in bid tenders, is that there are 3 C's get you to the table, the negotiating table. People often ask me what my win rate is, and the win rate is not a great indicator of success. As we all know, winning a deal takes many, many, many factors, and a good, solid, reliable bid response is a part of that. But what a bid and tender can do is get you to the table, even if you haven't been able to do the long relationship development, even if you're against an incumbent. A strong bid or tender that is compliant, competitive, and compelling can make a client, a prospect, sit up and go, I think we should be talking to these guys. So what I really say to our clients is, by working with Bid Helpdesk, we will maximize your chances of getting to the table, getting to that negotiation table, that opportunity present. So let's pull apart the ideas of what we mean by compliant, competitive, and compelling, these 3 C's that are so important. So a compliant bid is almost like the entry level requirement. And quite simply, just a number of very basic elements, and I'll talk why they're important in a moment. But you need to read all the instructions, you need to provide all the information, use provided templates, answer all the questions, include all the documents, do not alter the pricing tables, and remember to sign the declarations. That's a sort of hygiene list. And why this is so important, and I'll tell a short story here without actually naming the past client. But I got contacted by an organisation a few years ago who rang me in a slight state of distress. They had responded to a council tender that they thought they were guaranteed to win. They'd done everything right in terms of sort of business development and relationship management. They had a good product, and they responded to the RFP that was released by the council. But then after a couple of weeks, the council rang them up and said, I'm sorry, we've got to reject your offer. And they were full of apologies. And the reason was, my client did not follow these guidelines on your screen there about submitting a compliant bid. And like it or not, councils have a heavy responsibility for transparency and for process, and they need to follow their own procurement guidelines as strict instructions, in fact. And if you submit a non-compliant bid, you can be ruled out. Now, that's quite an extreme action. And I've got to say, I think there could have been other factors at play with my client. But the point was, it turned out this client with a super product simply didn't know how to respond with a compliant response to a bid or tender. And that's part of what Bid Helpdesk can do. We have responded to so many bids and tenders, not just on the Bid Helpdesk, but in our past corporate careers, that we can read all the instructions, we know what the interpretation is. With Bid Helpdesk, you will always pass the compliant flag because we focus right up front, but reading through the bid or tender, understanding all the instructions and what needs to be provided. One item I've got there is using the provided templates. Quite often, organizations will provide a Word document with sort of filled out with text boxes where you need to enter your responses. Use those documents. I found clients who have just been returning their own proactive standard proposal response to a bid or tender. Well, that doesn't provide all the information in the format as the client had requested, so that can be non-compliant. And include all the information. If they want 3 years of financial statements, provide 3 years of financial statements. And don't alter the pricing tables. Again, on grounds of probity, organizations need to do a fair apples for apples comparison between the competing commercial offers. So if you adjust the pricing tables for how you would like to present your pricing, that can rule you out, because the council needs to do that, as I said, apples for apples comparison between the different tenders. So do not alter pricing tables. And also do remember to sign the declarations. So a bid needs to be competitive. As I said, bids and tenders are the ultimate high pressure competitive environment. There's a fixed period of time, usually designed specifically to be a little bit too short to keep everybody on pressure. And you are up against people who are at least just as hungry to get the business as you are. So how do you work in that environment? Well, here are some guidelines we've built up over time and experience. So first of all, price to deliver only the minimum scope and requirements. Customers can paint a very big picture for what they're trying to achieve, and it's part of their sort of corporate business plan. That's interesting. That tells you that the size of a large opportunity there. But what you really need to identify is what is the customer actually trying to procure at this particular point under this particular bid or tender. So read through and just understand the minimum scope and the minimum requirements that need to be fulfilled. Do not overservice or overdeliver. You are only adding in extra costs that the customer doesn't necessarily need. Fine-tune your delivery cost model. Don't just work on pricing alone. Also look at your costs and ask yourself, for delivering this particular opportunity to the customer, what part of our delivery cost model could be optimized? Look at ways of fine-tuning and reducing your cost to deliver, not to compromise quality, not at all, just to make sure you are zeroing in on the very lowest cost proposal that you can put in front of your client. You may be familiar with the term sticker shock. There's a reason when you go into JD Hi-Fi or anywhere and everything's priced at sort of $1.99 or $2.99 or $5.99. They're just trying to get the number just below a certain threshold. And really the same is true in bids and tenders. Customers, they'll look through the pricing table and they'll look at the big number and they'll just say, okay, that's the number we're talking about. You need to make that number as reasonably small as possible so customers don't get that sticker shock and they can see that this is a very keenly priced opportunity that's being responded. So exclude options and upgrades. Don't overload the solution that you're proposing with things that the customer hasn't asked for. By all means, provide additional feature upgrades, but make sure they are priced separately and not included in your principal offer. As I said earlier, customers know what their market is. They know what pricing to expect. So don't go and try using higher margins. It is a fact that you will very likely be competing sometimes with people very keen to business who will go with very slim margins, shall we say. So make sure that the margins you're applying in your pricing model are the lowest you can comfortably accept. And then there used to be a saying years ago around, in the spirit of making sure you're only providing the minimum requirements, is don't offer a Rolls Royce when the customer wants a Toyota. And I thought it might be fun to try and update that very old saying. And I actually went to Perplexity, which is like a smart version of ChatGPT, and asked for some alternatives. And they suggested BMW or BYD or Ferrari or Fiat. But have that in your mind's eye. What is the customer looking for? And give them just what they need and something that matches their budget. And point 6 reiterates this, and it's a phrase that's quite common in American military procurement, and that's lowest cost, technically compliant. Your bid will be competitive if you are offering the customer the lowest cost to deliver a technically compliant solution. And the final third C is compelling. And this is where the real differentiator comes in between bids and tenders. We said, make sure your bid is compliant. That's simply making sure that you've ticked all the hygiene factors and that you haven't contravened any of the instructions or rules that the customer has set for the procurement process, and you've responded with every piece of information. It's important, it's not necessarily easy, but it needs to be got right. We just spoke at length on competitive pricing and making sure you're avoiding sticker shock and that customers are going to be pleasantly surprised by the pricing that you're offering. What will really land you the bid or tender is being compelling. You need to build a powerful case to be the successful bidder. Now, I said earlier that customers don't buy on price, they buy on value. And value is really price with a sort of adjustment for risk. If they see a very low price from a tenderer who doesn't have much experience and doesn't present a very professional response, that'll be a red flag. The fact that they've got the lowest price, they will not score well on other criteria, so they won't be buying for those. The customer will still be looking for a lower priced tender, but they will have other criteria. And that can be wrapped up in the general idea that you need to position yourself as a low risk supplier and as a credible supplier. If you have answered all the questions comprehensively, you are positioning yourself as the low risk, dependable, reliable supplier. And that's the most important part of being compelling. If you've passed that hygiene factor of being compliant and you have competitive pricing, you win or lose on how compelling your response is, which is about positioning, it's about understanding, and it's about communicating your insight into the customer's business challenge and why they have released their tender and why you should be the deserving winner. So you need to demonstrate your experience, your capability, and your capacity. And you need to establish your credentials. You need to reassure the customer that your solution is the best option for them. You need to have addressed all of their issues, and you need to show that you have the experience and that you can deliver. At Bid Helpdesk, we focus very much on the compelling side of bid and tender responses. And there are a number of items you really should have readily available to reuse in every bid and tender that you use to make it compelling. So case studies, they can just be a simple one-pager, something which talks about the successful engagement that you had with a past client. You talk about the business challenge that was solved. You talk about your approach. You talk about the products and services that you brought together, and you talk about the business impacts that the customer had. A good bank of case studies, and the more the merrier, absolutely. Choose them to be relevant to this particular customer that you're responding to, and that just builds your case for being compelling. Now, if you have a good case study and a past client has agreed for their name to be used in a case study, they will very likely also be willing to be a referee for you. So have a good set of referees lined up, people who have worked with you before in a customer-supplier relationship, who are prepared to attest to your reliability and thoroughness and credibility as a supplier. Methodologies. I increasingly see detailed questions around methodologies, and that's really just another word for process and approach and strategy. How do you go about delivering your solutions? That's what you need to respond to there. That can be a whole document, or it can just be a simple summary, but make sure you've got good content available to demonstrate that you have the knowledge and insight into delivering your bid and solution in the context of this client's particular business challenge and what they're trying to achieve. Nothing reassures a client more than seeing you've got a reliable set of methodologies that you will be deploying. Service level agreements and KPIs, basically numbers, performance metrics, have a standard set of SLAs and KPIs that you're prepared to commit to. And that, again, speaks to your confidence that you can meet and deliver everything that you are claiming to. Key personnel. Personnel are so important. They say people buy from people. And having some impressive resumes of key personnel who will be working with your clients will always be successful. And again, just build that case around you being the compelling and should be front runner for a bid or tender. Risk management. Tenders often ask around risk management. They want to know what risks you could encounter. Make sure you have some good responses around typical risks that you will see in any deployment or implementation or delivery of your product or service. Have some credible mitigation plans and strategies in place, but also read through the tender documents and through your own research, work out what particular or unique risks there could be with this particular client and speak to those. Don't be afraid to raise risks in a bid or tender, because customers know that they can be asking for something very difficult to be achieved. If you have a mature, well thought through, credible risk management plan, that actually increases your credibility rather than simply pretending that the risks won't exist. Project plans, Gantt charts, project delivery methodologies are all good documents to have available, and again, demonstrate your maturity and your capability and capacity to deliver. Again, lowering your risk and convincing the customer that this compelling and competitive response is in fact the most compelling and that you will be the most worthy winner. And then finally, in recognition, since it is Citation Group that are providing this webinar today, there really is nothing else which can really speak to your maturity as an organization and your capability and make a compelling bid by having your ISO certifications. ISO 9001 for quality management is near mandatory these days, and 14,001 for environmental management and 45,000, a relatively newer standard around OH&S management, are increasingly important, and certainly in government-based tenders. And again, there's a large number of government tenders made available. Having those certifications just positions you so strongly with the customer as being a very reliable provider there. In fact, what I have seen in tenders is that there's usually a question: if you have ISO 9001, you say yes and provide the evidence of the certification number. If you don't have that, you have to answer a long set of questions around how you do manage quality. And in fact, it's just easier to go and get the certification. So all those strategies there around making a compelling bid. It's a number of different items and deliverables you need to have. Having a good bid content library is essential. Bid Helpdesk helps you develop those, and they make you make your bid compelling and hopefully win you the business. And I think I'll just speak to this last slide here. So here is just a couple of contact details for myself. I do hope that was that useful and at least fired some thoughts. There's a lot to cover in bids and tenders, and I think I've been speaking for maybe about half an hour or so there, and only really scratched the surface. I'm led to believe that that barcode over on the right there will take you to Bid Helpdesk website. There is a contact form there. There's also a 1300 number, or you can just email me at james@bidhelpdesk.com. Follow us on LinkedIn. I do post a lot there. I'd love to have you join the crowd. As I said, the Bidding Edge newsletter goes out it's going out once a fortnight at the moment. We're now tipped 1,000 subscribers, and I've had a little idea that if we don't get through all the questions that come in, I'll actually be responding to those in next editions of the Bidding Edge. And also, the world's only MBA level textbook on bid management is my Managing Bids, Tenders and Proposals. And you won't have to follow me on LinkedIn for too long before having a prompt and a link to my publisher's website. So thank you, everybody, for your time. Thank you, Chris and Citation Group. I'm happy to take any questions and talk more.
Awesome. Thank you, James. Absolutely fantastic presentation. I'm sure we've got some valuable insights. Just wanted to reflect on your 3 C's while I've got the chance. Compliant, competitive, compelling. Compliant, thank you, James. Compliant webinar delivered by you based on my evaluation criteria. Very competitive. You didn't charge me for the privilege. And hopefully, judging on the audience's own evaluation criteria, very, very compelling, and I'm sure that'll be reflected in the Q&A and the conversations and discussions we'll be having post your session today. So thank you again very much. Guys, before we jump into the questions, just wanted to quickly touch base, go back to that poll we did early in the session, just some insights. Astonishing number of you have responded to tenders in the last 12 months, nearly everyone. So you don't need convincing what James says, that tenderings and bids matters. You're here to get better at it, and I'm hoping that'll be a reflection of the conversation we have post-discussion. And a lot of you, or two-thirds of you, saying chasing or requiring ISO certification, but you don't currently hold that one, which will link to one of the questions I think we've got for James in the session as well. Look, to wrap that up, the biggest challenge, understanding what is the evaluation criteria, or what are the people who are evaluating your tender response actually looking for. And hopefully James gave us a little bit of insight, but hopefully some further insight into that post today's discussion. So on the screen is, for the attendees, there is an offer for you to speak to Citation Certification. Obviously, the component that we can assist you with is achieving that certification and those standards that James referenced, plus a few others, depending on your requirements in your tenders and bids. If you scan the QR code, you'll be taken to either get in contact with us, download some information and some checklists to help you understand the standards, and take up the offer by attending this webinar to save an amount of money. I will call it we will waive the cost of the certification fees, which is directly related to you getting a shiny certificate once you've achieved it, being on a register to tell everyone that you do have it, and if you like, actually getting a lovely printed copy hung up on your office wall as well. So take some time. We'll leave the QR code up there. Looking forward to you getting in contact with us to take advantage of the offer. So leaving that on there, I think it is time actually, James, to go into those questions. So we did receive a great number of them. Thank you. Some are actually still coming through. Feel free to pop them in. We've got a bit of time, hopefully, to go through your question and be able to get some insight from James before we close out today's session. Couple of questions, fairly simple one. How do we know what certs or what certifications we need? I'm hopeful this is an easy one for you to handle, James.
Yes. Well, I think it's almost becoming mandatory. Quality management, ISO 9001. That is universal. It's across all industries. If you have any sort of materials, products, hardware, whatever, environmental management is an important consideration. And then anything involving, professional skilled labour, crafts and trades, making sure you've got thorough organisation health and safety. All organisations are responsible for environmental management and OH&S. But if that is a particular risk area in your solution, then you should have demonstrated proof that you manage that area responsibly. One I don't think I actually spoke to, but there is increasingly in the world of IT and data, with everyone so concerned now about maintaining privacy and preventing sort of cybersecurity threats. ISO 27001 is also becoming very, very important. That's around information security management. And what often trips people up with that is they think it's some sort of technical, technology-based standard. It's actually around your processes and your controls for managing data, who has access to what. But again, ISO 27001, if you're doing anything IT related, and particularly that involves handling personally identifiable information, or your lawyers are always reminding you of the obligations under the Commonwealth Privacy Act. ISO 27001 is a very good one to have.
A couple of others that we've got. What is the biggest mistake made during tenders?
Ooh.
I know it's fairly broad.
Pursuing a tender that has a low probability of winning. I talked earlier around understanding the opportunity and knowing what an ideal opportunity looks like. Pursuing the wrong tender. If you're pursuing the wrong tender, you're wrong. You're not going to win. You are putting resources, you are investing time in something which you are unlikely to win. And there's a lot to be said. I could talk, but I won't here and now, on qualification and really screening an opportunity, what criteria to use to understand, are you in a competitive position with this tender? And if you're not, you should not be bidding or tendering. The bid for everything approach actually lowers your chances of winning across the board.
Interesting. Very interesting. Indeed. There's one here, and probably more so for me. What information do people need to get started with ISO certification? I reckon James would probably know that that's very much about your process, procedures, policies, and that information that you referenced prior to. So if you don't have a lovely shiny certificate to add to your tender or response, that you're going to be asked to provide details of your policies, your procedures, your risk management, etc., etc. That is the type of information that is encompassed in what we call a management system. And that is the stepping stones or the starting blocks or the foundations, as you like, to achieving certification. The audit and the certificate are just simply a byproduct of someone like Citation Certification reviewing your systems in accordance with those particular standards, and ensuring that a business is doing exactly what they said that they were going to do, and having that reward with the certificate as well. Feel free to speak to us. We can certainly intimate what your requirements may be, depending on the types of industry that you're in, the services or products that you deliver, as to what would be the best standard for your organisation, or standards, depending on circumstances. Alrighty. James, you put up a big stat about the number of tenders from the federal government that were awarded last year. That's awesome, and there's clearly opportunity for small businesses. Does that include micro businesses? And what would be the first step to start finding and qualifying the right tenders based on that segment or size?
There certainly will be opportunities. Again, micro. Should we just assume that's one or maybe two people? If you've got a particular unique specialization, a unique set of sort of professional skills or engineering skills or other skills, yes. If you've got the right, so if you've got the right contacts and you understand what federal government is looking for, that you can win a bid or tender. There's certainly nothing to preclude a micro organisation, micro business. But of course, obviously, there's a smaller set of opportunities going to be available for that. So just for example, over Christmas, there was a tender from Department of Defence for some very specialist engineering skills. And there were several very small micro businesses who had a unique speciality responding to be on that panel as an approved supplier.
Fantastic. So the long and short of it is tendering's for everyone.
Yes.
All righty. We've got probably time for one more question. This relates probably fairly specifically into a health and safety topic, probably my domain, James, which is related to the psychosocial aspect of safety. I know there's been some recent legislative changes in some of the states and territories. It is factored into the health and safety about psychosocial safety. Psychosocial safety, there is a particular ISO standard that gives you guidance and governance as to what a system that looks after or manages psychosocial safety and health in the workplace. That is ISO 45003, and that should be built into or as a culmination of your health and safety management system or your overarching management system in accordance with ISO 45001. So there are services, there are references, and there is probably more so in the development and the way that you approach your system and what it entails or the scope of activities that it covers to assist there. Again, all part of the conversation with respect to your system and what particular standards, etc., that you are looking to meet. Team, there is a raft of knowledge. We've still got the information up on the screen. If you are looking to speak to anyone regarding tenders, whether it's certification or for both, please don't hesitate to reach out, schedule a chat with one of the team about today's topics or anything else that you have related to tenders and or certification that you have questions on. Just remember, we will, as I mentioned at the start, be sending a follow-up note shortly after this session that will include a link to the recording of today, hopefully edited out when I was choking and couldn't actually string two words together. Guys, thank you very much for joining us. Big thank you to James for sharing his expertise today. We look forward to hearing from you post today's session, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar from Citation Group. Thanks again, and take care.